Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Russ Gannum, and I am Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs at the University of Iowa. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar entitled Global Mentoring: Strategies for International Faculty Success. And so before we introduce our panelists, I'd like to go into the origin story behind this webinar. So our dear friend and colleague Gigi Durham and I were at a new faculty orientation this past August. And Gigi was in her role as university ombudsperson. I was there in my role as Associate Provost and Dean of International Programs. And during the orientation, many new international faculty stopped by our respective tables and were asking questions about, just how the university worked, what resources were available, how various offices on campus could help them. And after the orientation, Gigi walked over to me and said, "Well, Russ, what are we doing to help international faculty on campus? What are we doing to onboard them? What are we doing in terms of providing information regarding resources or just how the university works?" And I said, "Well, apart from what colleges and departments do on their own, we as an institution really don't do much of anything. And so maybe there's a void that we can fill here." So, and the credit goes to Gigi. She suggested, well, let's think about some sessions where we could bring in faculty from international destinations who could then give advice on how they navigated university administration, how they went through the tenure and promotion process, how they juggled teaching and research and work-life balance. And we said, well, hey, that's a really, really good idea. So here in IP and with Gigi, we worked together to put together what we think is really a blue ribbon panel on this particular topic. And so before I introduce our blue ribbon panel, I would like to thank many people who put this webinar together. So first and foremost, Gigi, thank you for the idea, and thank you for all your work in organizing the webinar. I'd also like to thank Amy Green from Communications and Relations staff in International Programs for staffing the tech board this afternoon. Dan Vorwerk in our office also helped prodigiously in putting together today's webinar. Ben Partridge from Communications and Relations created the poster for the webinar, which helped us, register the participants. I'd also like to thank Amy Brewster and Katie Ron, our director and associate director, respectively, of Communications and Relations, who helped with advertising and just the overall promotion of the event. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our panel. Our panel is made up of faculty from international destinations who represent a really wide cross-section of disciplines and experiences on our campus. And so first, I'd like to introduce Professor Sandra Guzman Armstrong, who is clinical professor and advanced education program director in the College of Dentistry and Dental Clinics at the University of Iowa. Dr. Guzman Armstrong joined the Department of Operative Dentistry in 2001 after completing her dental degree from Javeriana University in Bogota, Colombia, and then completing her master's degree at the University of Iowa College of Dentistry. She holds a position of clinical professor in the Department of Operative Dentistry at the UI. She is also the director of the Operative Advanced Education Program and teaches the sophomore and junior courses in the areas of cardiology, minimal invasive dentistry, and aesthetic dentistry. I should also mention on a personal note that Sandra is my dentist, and she does a wonderful job. I've been in her care for the last 12 years, and my teeth are functioning and thriving thanks to Dr. Guzman Armstrong. So thank you, Sandra. Next, we have Professor H.S. Uday Kumar, who is Associate Dean for Graduate Programs and also for Research and Faculty in the College of Engineering. Professor Uday Kumar is also the Roy J. Carver of Professor, he's the Roy J. Carver Professor of Engineering in our College of Engineering. He's also a professor of mechanical engineering. He also is a research engineer in hydroscience and engineering in IIHR. His research interests include development of accurate and flexible numerical methods for the simulation of three-dimensional flows in the presence of moving boundaries. These include a phase change energy storage, multi-phase, multi-material flows, fluid structure interactions, multi-scale modeling of complex reactive materials, and machine learning of structure property performance relationships for materials by design. In other words, he's a very, very smart man and quite an expert in his field. Speaking of another very smart person and another expert in their field, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Annick Dominique Curtius. She's professor of Francophone Studies and director of graduate studies in the French and Italian department. And Annie recently earned the Graduate College Outstanding Faculty Mentor Award because she's directed many, many dissertations over the years. Similarly, Annie Dominique Curtius is the director of the working group Museum Futures at the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies. And Annie's disciplinary work interweaves cultural theory and cinematic, visual, and performing arts of the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, and sub-Saharan Africa. She also works in post-decolonial museum studies, dialectal eco-criticism, I hope I said that correctly, the defacement and toppling of iconography of slavery in public spaces. She is the author of numerous articles and book chapters and is the leading editor of many volumes and journals. Her latest book is entitled Suzanne Césaire, Literary and Artistic Archaeology of Hindered Memory, which came out in 2020. Similarly, on our panel, we are very privileged to have Anuruddha Datta, who is Associate Professor of Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies at the University of Iowa. Datta's research interests include transnational sexualities, globalization, development, political economy, and the institutionalization of gender and sexual politics in India. Their work has appeared in journals such as Transgender Studies Quarterly, QED, a journal in GLBTQ World Making, International Feminist Journal of Politics, Feminist Review, Gender and History, and South Asian History and Culture. Datta's current book project, entitled Globalizing Through the Vernacular, Kotis, Hijras, and the Making of Queer and Trans Identities in India, is scheduled for publication with Bloomsbury Academic in late 2024. Datta also works as a volunteer and advisor with several collectives of trans and gender nonconforming communities, such as Kotis and Hijras in Eastern India. And then finally, Meenakshi Gigi Durham is professor and collegiate scholar in the University of Iowa's School of Journalism and Mass Communication. She holds a joint appointment in the Department of Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies. She also serves as the university's faculty ombudsperson. Her research focuses on representations of gender and sexuality in the media, with an emphasis on the politics of the body, intersectional identities, and youth cultures. Her articles have appeared in leading peer-reviewed communication journals, and she serves on the editorial boards of many journals as well, including Feminist Media Studies, Critical Studies in Media Communication, among others. She is the author of the books Me Too, The Impact of Rape and Culture in the Media, came out in 2021, Technosex, which came out in 2016, and The Lolita Effect in 2008. She is the co-editor of Media and Cultural Studies, Key Works, which appeared in 2012. Gigi is also a member of International Programs Faculty Advisory Council and has been a great champion of international education for decades. Wonderful. And so with that, we can begin our round of questioning. And Gigi, will you do the honors of asking our first question, and then we'll go around the table. I should also just mention one other thing is that for our participants, for our registrants, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function. We will curate the questions and then read them toward the end of the webinar when we have devoted time to this purpose. Similarly, I should also mention that today's webinar will be recorded and will be accessible via our YouTube channel within the next 7 to 10 days, and we'll remind everyone of this at the end of the session as well. So please, Gigi, to you the honors of asking the first question.
Sure. Thank you, Russ. Yeah, and thanks for all the introductions, and many thanks to the panelists and the people who are here to attend this webinar. Yeah, so I'm going to ask the panelists to please tell us a little about your trajectory as an international scholar. What is your country of origin, and how did you come to the University of Iowa and find your way to success here? And I think I would like to start with Annie Curtius.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you, Gigi and Russ, for putting up such a rich webinar, and thank you for the participants to attend. Thank you to Sandra, Annie, and Uda. So in terms of my trajectory, Gigi, so first of all, I was born in Martinique, which is a French territory, so it's located in the French Caribbean. To give you some sort of a location, it's between St. Lucia and Trinidad, so in that area of the Caribbean archipelago. So I went to grad school in Montreal, and most specifically at the University of Montreal, and where I got my MA and my PhD in comparative literature. And I then completed a postdoc in Complete as well at University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And the year after my postdoc, I got my first tenure track position as an assistant professor of French and Francophone studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine in Trinidad. And then I moved back to North America with a position at a tenure track position at University of Delaware. And then 4 years later, I was at Iowa. I accepted a position here, and I must say that the international reputation of Iowa really sort of convinced me that I was making the right choice in accepting that position, among other reasons to come to Iowa. So that's sort of the geographical scope of my trajectory. And to say just a few words about my scholarship and my teaching, it's primarily a focus on the Francophone Global South. And I believe that I privilege the notion of cross-pollination in my work in terms of my research, my teaching, my advising, because it allows me to nurture versatility, shared intellectual experience, multiplicity, as well as openness to different type of mentalities and thinking out of the box. So I think that I'll stop there. So this is sort of, general idea of who I am.
Yeah, and just to follow up, you feel like you found support for that sort of interdisciplinary, sort of multifaceted work here at Iowa?
Yes. I think that when I was being interviewed for the position at Iowa, I was, I think, it was very interesting that my department had allowed me to interact with faculty whose research interacted with mine. And they were, at that time, they were no longer at Iowa, but at that time, they were directors of the African Studies program and the Caribbean Diaspora and Atlantic Studies program. So I had this first window that was sort of available to me at that moment of the interview. And I quickly realized how those faculty were going to become some sort of the mentors that I needed to position myself as an international scholar based on my origins on one side, but also allow me to, because that was really important for me, not to make my international focus not an exotic label, but a research field that is fundamentally important and that has created jobs, tenure track jobs since the 1990s, and jobs that some of our alumni graduate students are occupying right now. So it was important for me to sort of have this window since the job interview and continue the process of interacting with those people that I had the opportunity to meet.
Yeah, thank you. So important. So I guess, maybe I will just call on others to tell their story as well. So maybe should I move to Sandra?
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for being here and for welcoming this opportunity to share our journey in the US. So my trajectory, I think as many of us, I came to the US with 2 suitcases, with the dream to learn English and dentistry. A lot of the information comes in English, most of the information and journals come in English. So when I finished dental school, my English was not that great. And I felt that the importance of learning for my career as well, and for personally. So I decided to come here, and I was in Bloomington, Indiana for about 6 months. And then I realized I was, getting to speak too much Spanish with Spanish speakers. So I moved to Boston, and I end up somehow in Iowa, looking at the university and pushing myself to be out there to learn the language the best I could. And I found a program in operative dentistry, which is not a specialty or not a special interest in our field in Colombia. And I decided to pursue my master's after a year and a half or so that I was here. And I found in Iowa, and especially in that department, the majority of the students that they were applying were international. So I relate really, really well with the department. I relate really well with my mentors. I had wonderful mentors, and the College of Dentistry was very welcoming to diversity and to international students, especially in our department. Just to say, I finished my master's and I went to Kentucky for a couple of years, came back, but the majority of our department faculty are from out of the US, and the majority of our residents are from the outside of the US. So it's extremely diverse, and so to us is not really that different. I think it's been the journey that I have had. And then I focus a lot on an area that focus on the most prevalent oral disease in the world. So I have had the opportunity to be able to work with people all over the world, because caries disease is the most prevalent oral disease in the world. So of course there is a lot of efforts globally, and that has, as I've been growing in my career and been able to have more national, international exposure, I've been able to interact and disseminate some of my understanding and knowledge into this area. So it's been a long journey, but it's a very supportive journey, at least in Iowa, has been very much so. So thank you.
That's great to hear. Yeah, that's a wonderful story. Yeah, so maybe I'll move to Uday now.
Thanks, Gigi. Hi, everybody. I'm Uday Kumar. I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Programs, Research, and Faculty in the College of Engineering. I grew up in a town called Mysore in the south of India. By Indian standards, it's a small town, about 1 million people. And from there, I went to the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, for my bachelor's in technology for aerospace engineering. Growing up, my dream was to come to the United States and work for NASA. That was pretty much what I wanted to do. It didn't quite work out that way. After my engineering bachelor's degree, I applied to various places in the United States for graduate school. I didn't quite get to where I wanted to be because my grades weren't so good. I played too much cricket in my undergraduate days. So I was more fond to be found more on the cricket field than in classrooms at that time. But anyway, it all worked out. I went to the University of Florida, Gainesville. I intended to be there for a master's and seek more greener pastures for PhD, but I just loved my advisor, and I just continued to work with him and stayed for a postdoc. And I never wanted to leave, but he left after that. So I had to move. And then I came to Iowa in 1999. So I've been here for a very long time. It's a lovely place. And we have 2 kids. So kids have grown up in this town. In fact, one of them went to City High with Gigi's daughter, I believe. So this is a family place now. Iowa is just hometown. In fact, I've lived here longer than any other place in my life. So this is home. Yeah, that's my trajectory.
Thanks, Uday. Yeah, me too. I've lived longer in Iowa City than anywhere else, which is really interesting considering I've had a very global life.
That's right.
Yeah. And finally, Ani Datta, could you please tell us about your trajectory, how you got here and how you found success here?
Thank you, Gigi, and thank you, Russ, and everyone involved in organizing this for inviting me to be a part of this. So I also grew up in a small town in India, much smaller than Mysore, actually, in a town called Kollani or Kalyani in eastern India. It can be seen as a suburb of Kolkata, about 50 kilometers to the north, in the state of West Bengal in eastern India. And I did a lot of my graduate education was in India, my bachelor's and my master's, which was at Jadavpur University in Calcutta. And at that point of time, I wanted to explore some of the interdisciplinary PhD programs that US universities offered, which now some Indian universities also do that. But at that point of time, interdisciplinary work in gender and sexuality studies was harder to do within the existing departmental paradigms of Indian universities. So that was for me a motivation to apply to graduate schools in the US. And the other thing was that I also, the research funding offered by many US public universities was also a motivation, because that would mean that I would be able to do more extensive field work in India than perhaps I could have based at an Indian university. Although again, this is like changing now, because like US universities have shrinking budgets, and now Indian universities have been expanding PhDs. But at that point of time in the late 2000s, these were some of my motivating factors that led me to come to the US as initially a student of Asian languages and literatures at the University of Minnesota with a minor in development studies. Then a couple of years in, I realized that the gender, women, and sexuality studies department at the University of Minnesota was going to be a better fit. So I retained the PhD minor program, which was part of I got this fellowship. It's like, I forget the exact name, but it's MacArthur Global Scholars Program or something at the University of Minnesota at that point of time. And then I retained the PhD package, but moved my main department to gender, women's, and sexuality studies at the University of Minnesota. So I've been based in the Midwest actually for most of the time that I have been in the US, or all of the time practically. But I have also actually spent a lot of time in India, working in India, not just field work, but also some activism throughout this period. And I feel that, University of Iowa has been like, that way, it's been really helpful to make, to maintain this kind of transnational lifestyle, which is very challenging. It has its brings a lot of challenges, all kinds of stuff from like legal, visa-related issues to like balancing work obligations. But so far, the departments here have been really supportive. But I guess I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. So after my PhD, Iowa was one of the places I applied to, and it had at that point of time a job opening in transnational sexualities, which fit very closely with my dissertation. So it was a very natural choice to make an application. And also being in the Midwest, I was already used to the region, and I think that also helped me make this choice. And so kind of coming to University of Iowa after having been at the University of Minnesota for 5 or 6 years, it didn't feel like much of a transition. I think for me, the bigger kind of transition was when I actually came to Minnesota in 2007, directly from India. So everything from the weather to, you know, the cultural mores and everything, that was a shock, and it required some time for me to navigate. But by the time I came to Iowa City, I think it wasn't much of a shift at all. And in fact, it felt like almost like a smaller version of Minneapolis, or like a neighborhood within Minneapolis in some ways. Not exactly, but, you know, there are enough parallels, you know, to make me not feel so out of place, I guess. And, you know, what also really helped in my case, I would say, is that I feel that the decision I had made as a PhD student to shift to gender, women's, and sexuality studies was the best decision I've taken in terms of my research and career interests, because compared to many more traditional or older established disciplines, you know, the flexibility that is there in GWIS or gender, women's, and sexuality studies departments, that has been very helpful for an international scholar like me. So, for example, allowing me to do collaborative work, allowing me to do you know, extensive field work, and to write based on that, and like allowing enough scope for my tenure packet to be actually like, I guess, built around what I was doing rather than around some sort of normative expectation that this is what it would look, or it should look like. That was extremely helpful for me. And that's one of the big things that had drawn me to this interdiscipline in the first place, back when I was a PhD student. So I think that made my life here at Iowa, like, you know, much smoother than perhaps it might have been in some other disciplines. And the tenure process was also, I would say, of course, it's always challenging, but I got a lot of mentoring support and help from senior colleagues, and the process was always very transparent. That was very helpful. You know, like I had regular points of communication with people in the department, so which helped make the expectations clear, and also, like, you know, where there could be some flexibility, what was more kind of set. So these things are very helpful to know early on in one's process, and that's true for everyone. That's not just for international faculty, but I think for international faculty, because you're also like often going through other processes at the same time. Like I was going through a complex visa process. It wasn't exceptionally challenging in my case or anything, but it's just the process itself is just really intense, like going from student visa to H-1B to eventually a green card. So that took a lot of my time and energy, and it was almost like having a second job, as I would sometimes tell my colleagues, you know, just managing all of that. So departmental support and communication and transparency really helped with that process. But I can speak more to these, I guess, in later parts of our session.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the immigration issues. I think that's super important as well. But yeah, Russ is going to ask the next
I was
question.
just going to say, Ani, what your answer, you know, is a perfect segue into our second question, which is we would like to ask the panelists to share their experiences in navigating the UI administration, as well as other bureaucracies as international scholars, and what were the barriers or the tricks that you learned along the way. And I think that this question is particularly important because, you know, even domestic faculty, when they come to the University of Iowa or any institution of higher learning, and they see the levels of bureaucracy, it makes very little sense. I remember when I started at the University of Nebraska, and you know, there was an orientation, and I learned about, you know, the different levels of you know, the hierarchy and just how the central administration worked. I had no understanding at all. And it wasn't until much later that I even begin to grasp all of this. So I'm just wondering what that experience was like for you as international scholars, how you kind of navigated the bureaucracy, how you wrapped your head around it, how did you come to understand it, and then what lessons would you share with others who are in a similar situation? And maybe I'll start with Sandra.
Yes, thank you. So I think for my journey with the bureaucracy and administration at the college, mainly I was not very aware of how things would work here. The institutions are very different in some ways, although we have in Colombia's the tenure process, we have the promotion type of process the same way from assistant to associate and professor. But it learns it's very different the way these evaluations are completed and the way that they follow up and the mentorship is different. I did not have a mentor early on in my career, and that I really realized that I needed it later on, and I really look for it was more my colleagues that I work with that there were associate professors at that point that they would give me hints about it. Now the college has established a more structural program for junior faculty where they have series monthly and they support junior faculty quite a bit. So it was pretty much you take the manual and you read the manual, and you keep going. You're assigned to certain things and you keep going. So I really had to ask a lot more. I really didn't realize the process as well. I was very fortunate to have great mentors that I did not know they were mentoring me as I was going through the process. I think documentation was difficult. I think I didn't realize the importance to document things early on for promotion, the importance to really look into the future of your career and the area of expertise. I think I had this within the first few years of my career, I started realizing that I need to find an area of expertise. And I think that really helped me because there is so many areas in my specialty that you can focus on and you can jump in so many areas at the same time. And I see that with junior faculty that happen very, very often, especially when they don't understand the system really well. You jump into so many areas to do your scholarship or your teaching that you're really not focusing on growing in a specific area. So that I would advise to really focus on something that you have passion for, that you very, very important that you have passion for, that you can contribute to the community, more important that you can grow, and also that you can contribute to as a person and as a professional. I think that's very, very critical because that's what makes your job be enjoyable and love your job every day. So I've been very fortunate to have that and found that area for me, and I feel that I can make an impact. So that among mentorship within my department, outside of the department, and then later on I realized that I need to have mentorship outside of my department as well. And so international mentorship, other universities, national mentorship, and I start getting into within my area and to get into organizations and institutions that can help me grow. Because I would not advise to stay within the constrictions of what you get in the department or your college. I think it's important to branch out, and it's important to see what others are doing nationally and internationally. So this is what I could say that I would advise.
Right. No, that's true.
Bureaucracy.
Thank you for that, Sandra. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned two really important things. So motivation, and making sure that you evolve as a professional, that you continue to learn and then apply that knowledge. And then mentoring, it's absolutely essential because we do not operate in a vacuum. I
Mhm.
think sometimes we are drawn to this profession because we can be independent, we can work alone, which is fine as far as it goes, but we really need other people to help guide us, or at least, use as a sounding board as
Yeah.
we begin our careers and go through them, and then we learn how to become mentors ourselves. So this
Exactly.
is very, very important. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um uh Ani, so please go ahead and give us your experience in this realm.
Yes, I think that you touched upon a very important point, Russ, when you said that we become, I think, good mentors when we had great mentorship. And I believe, as I mentioned earlier, that the type of mentorship I got very early on, since I would say the very first weeks when I arrived at Iowa in 2003, really motivated me and gave me the energy that I am sort of redisseminating, among my younger colleagues and graduate students and undergrad as well. So I believe that with your initiative, I think that this is some sort of a platform for the creation of something that could be bigger, like some sort of a global mentoring program or center or network with its physical space that will really provide international faculty with this type of mentorship that is so fundamental in navigating, all those things that Sandra referred to. In terms of my own experience, I think that I'm going to divide it into three categories. First, I would say the paperwork related to immigration documents. And I vividly remember that at some point, moving from a TN visa, because I also have Canadian citizenship, moving from a TN visa to the H-1B and then the green card was a nightmare. And I didn't have enough support. So I was sort of all by myself trying to figure out and read the literature. I mean, we faculty, we're not used to understand because it's a particular type of terminology and you have to be very careful about the box that you tick. Otherwise, you have to redo the process again. So this is, I think, something that is absolutely fundamental. Have specialists who can advise faculty, but real advice, because we have other things to do. We have teaching, we have surveys. So navigating those elements all together, it's complex. So that's one thing. The second category is providing enough support in terms of financial support to attend conferences, workshops internationally. And I must say that the University of Iowa has been very supportive, my department as well, in securing funds through IE grants or IP, several types of grants at IPs that allowed me to conduct fieldwork in the Indian Ocean, in Europe, and also in the Caribbean. So the financial support is there, must be there as well, because this is how we build our international visibility. The third category is in terms of the mentorship, which I would say should not be only sort of arranged around the idea that only international faculty will be in a room and a senior international faculty will be the one mentoring. I think it's important to have domestic and international faculty together to think about the different issues, because for the promotion and tenure process, it is an anxiety for everyone. We must all be, we must be honest with this. It's your institution, outside reviewers are judging your work, and it's equally, intense for domestic and international. So I believe that in terms of mentoring junior faculty and move them step by step, allowing them to understand some sort of a terminology that is in the document provided by CLAS, which is my college, those faculty need to interact with everyone, not only international faculty. They need to have this broad scope so that, the conversation could be at different levels. So that's, I think, those are the three aspects that I would want to focus on in terms of providing enough resources to help faculty grow. Second, and I think that the fourth category probably, which is a little bit far off, but it's very early, make junior faculty understand that they have to sort of carve out in their mind the second book option. The second book option is, I think, very, because this second book that people are probably going to judge you more on. You work without a safety net. You on your own. You propose a new ideas for the growth of the field, and this has to start very early on. So as you work on your first book, you sort of already need to be embarking into a process where you're already thinking about the ways in which you're going to make a contribution to the field with that second book. And that, again, comes with mentorship.
Very good. I mean, those are all very, very important points, Ani. I mean, especially, and I think this has been referred to, previously as well, is that if you're an international faculty member and you're dealing with visa and immigration issues, it is a second job. I mean,
it is a second job.
It is true that there's some help on campus available, but you're the one that has to file the petitions for the visas. You're the ones that sometimes you have to hire a lawyer. Sometimes, you have to appear in Des Moines or Chicago or go to a consulate somewhere. And it takes up just an enormous amount of time. And meanwhile, you're trying to publish, you're trying to teach, you're serving on committees, you're a junior faculty member. You've only really got 5 years to do all of this because you go up for tenure in your 6th year. So it's a monumental task. And I think that, in terms of your third point, making sure that all faculty, not just international faculty, are mentoring international faculty, but domestic faculty as well, are invested in this process, invested in faculty success sort of writ large, is crucial. Because if we are, then we can recruit more international faculty to our campus and make sure that we continue to look more like the world here at the University of Iowa. So I deeply appreciate those comments. Uday, please, your words of wisdom regarding university administration and navigating these obstacles.
I don't know if I can speak much about university administration knowledgeably. I in the beginning of my career, I did not have much transaction with the university administration. Of course, now I have too much transaction in my current role. But so, I'll withhold my remarks on that. But I do want to maybe tease out a couple of points that both Sandra and Ani mentioned. And I want to reemphasize that a little bit. I think, international faculty, especially in the first few years, there are many, many headwinds. Immigration, I could go on for days about that. And it's truly a pain, right? So you're experiencing this, but one thing you have to understand, I guess, or we have to understand as international faculty, is that typically domestic faculty have no idea what any of that stuff because they have never experienced it. They cannot offer empathy or any support because it is completely alien to them. You might as well have come from Mars. So do not expect too much in that regard from domestic faculty. Now, there are many, many things that intersect this whole first few years navigation, aside from immigration, which is more mechanistic. But when we come in, and even to this day, we do carry in us an element of imposter syndrome as international faculty. Some of it is, of course, exacerbated by political goings on, as currently is happening, because you always ask yourself, what the heck, I've lived in this country for 40 years and I've contributed more to this country by educating your kids and all that stuff, and you're still questioning my value in this country, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, okay? So, you have to you have to shake that off and think that's just BS. So you need to learn to call BS when you see it. And that's just total bogus stuff, okay? And it's mostly just political nonsense. So you have to kind of shield yourself from that. But even aside from immigration and politics, right, there is intrinsically, I think, something we all have to deal with, which is that we are out of our comfort zone. We come in culturally out of our comfort zone. We don't quite fit in. We don't quite understand what the whole point is about football and people running into each other at high speeds. We don't quite understand, how to fit into the general kind of conversation that goes around sports, for example, in social settings. I've been to when you go to a party in India or many other places, it's a very different situation. There's a host, the host invites you and they make a big deal out of you and act like you're a VIP, and there's all kinds of dynamics that goes on. Here, if you go to a party, you're pretty much on your own. This was very striking to me when I initially went to American parties. You're just kind of wandering around trying to find out where so lots of those kinds of things. Every day is new, every day is different, every day is discomforting. And you're dealing with a lot of these situations outside of your work. In fact, the thing that is most comforting and where you fit like a glove is your work. And everything outside of it is off balance. So, how do you work yourself into a 40-year career into not just being effective, but being super effective to the point that you are actually a leader in your field, and perhaps even a leader at your institution, so that you're not just a grunt, and you're not just consigned to your cubicle or your little office room, and that's not your world. And how do you have a voice that is heard, and not just ignored or and heard equally to people who have grown up and brought up through these systems? It's a very, very difficult road to navigate. So one piece of advice I would have there is seek out discomfort. If we hide from discomfort, we will never get anywhere. So go to those parties where you're by yourself. Make yourself visible, make yourself heard. Do not limit your congregation with people from your countries, your cultures, whatever it is. Break out of that, because that's not the road to success. Sticking with what you're comfortable with is not the road to success, not in this country. And the amazing thing about this country is that if you do all of that and you do stretch yourself, there is no limit to your success. But it will not be handed to you, and you cannot stick with what's comfortable, and it just doesn't work. So there are lots of complexities. International faculty are not experiencing the same thing as domestic faculty. We are first generation most of the time. If you look at faculty, the statistics on faculty across the United States, a large percentage of them came from homes where there was a person who was either in academia or in highly educated, the PhD or something. We don't come from those kinds of backgrounds, most of us. And we are new in this society and country, and we have to acculturate ourselves. But you have to force yourself to do it. None of this is easy. But on the other hand, it is an enormous source of growth. I find that by discomforting yourself, you actually make yourself a much more powerful person than if you're just stuck with what's comforting to you. So, on a weekly basis, I cook a lot, and I hardly ever cook Indian food. So, and I've kind of forced myself over the years to adopt that pattern. Because it actually, every time I cook, it actually gives me a little bit of an insight, or I read a recipe, or I listen to a cooking show. It gives me a little insight into another culture that pushes the envelope for me. So, I think there's a question in the comment box. I don't much believe in affinity groups, because that's too comforting.
Right.
That's what I have to say.
Well, that's marvelous, Uday. I mean, the way you talk about personal and professional challenges really shows how the two are completely interwoven for international faculty. That at certain moments, in fact, at several moments, they're indistinguishable from one another. And so, and I don't think that domestic faculty really have an understanding of what international faculty go through. And you could argue, well, why would they? Nonetheless, it's, when you develop these collegial relationships, I think you do have to look at everyone's individual experience to the extent possible, and develop, a sense of not just empathy, but also admiration, because what you're doing, I think, is really inspiring, because you're overcoming many obstacles, or many more obstacles than a lot of domestic faculty can even imagine. I see that you have your hand up, so please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Russ. I wanted to sort of echo several points that you raised, Uday. And I think it's very important indeed for international faculty not to stick together, but open themselves as much as possible and adopt a relational dynamics rather than a me and the rest, but include oneself into the rest. And I think that this is also going to sort of allow the junior faculty to break the ice, but at the same time break the language barrier, because we have to address the notion of language. Because for most of the time, international faculty, they arrive in the US and English is their third, fourth, or fifth language. International faculty are polyglots. So they arrive in a setting where English is the dominant language, and it's of course. But I think that having to navigate the complexity of the bureaucracy while adapting to another world that thinks differently and linguistically, it's another challenge. It's another job in itself. So I think that this is so important to, from the very beginning, reach out to people. And as you said, Uday, go to those parties and speak that broken English. And then at some point, you're going to be able to be as fine as everyone else. But you have to jump, you have to break the ice, and you have to be able to make yourself acceptable as you are with that broken English, but that eventually it will pay off. And I think that that's something that probably administrators don't really think about. They just take for granted that we arrive and we have the codes and we speak the language and we're fine, which is not the case. So I think that that's another issue to bring forward in the mentorship workshops, the ways in which faculty can be trained in terms of communicating and be as fluent as possible in an administrative language as well, not so much in the scholarly language, but the administrative language.
Very good. And then Ani, I'll just ask you to kind of chime in on this particular question.
Sure. Thank you. So I think I would say that there is, in some cases, both a need for affinity groups or like networks, and also obviously going beyond one's comfort zone and mixing with people that one might otherwise not feel comfortable with. So I think particularly with regard to immigration issues, I feel that I don't know if any such group exists, but having some sort of faculty support network would be extremely helpful. So that is something that I would request administrators to look into if possible, because various reasons. One is that the faculty staff in immigration services, they try to do their best. And I have had a lot of support during my entire immigration process, particularly from Randall Nice. So shout out to Randall. I think he's been extremely helpful. He has given more than his share of time and answered many questions that I've had over the years, particularly regarding my green card case and later on during the pandemic, when, of course, everything went haywire. And I was also stuck in India. But the thing is that they are also, I feel like over the years that I have been observing them, I feel that I think some of their work burden seems to have gone up, and the amount of time that they can devote to any one particular case seems to have gone down. So I feel that the university should consider actively increasing the amount of legal support available and expanding that office to be commensurate with the probably increased numbers of international faculty who are present here compared to, say, 20 years back. So that's one thing. But there's also a lot of fine print, a lot of things regarding the whole process that sometimes it's the best resource is other people who have gone through similar processes. So in the case of Iowa, I did not find any such network here because firstly, there are just so few South Asian faculty, and some of whom who are here, they're already citizens or have green cards. And the process has also been changing, especially with the changes in presidential regimes. So you need people with more recent experience, not someone who went through the process like 30 years ago. So in my case, like during the pandemic, I turned to Facebook groups. Actually, there's one group that came up. I forget, it was at that point of time called something different, but now it's called SOS Global Indians, and a lot of people use it. It's become extremely well known and well used. Probably most Indians and who are in the US are going to be on that group or on some similar groups. And I found that extremely helpful to navigate the whole pandemic scenario, which, I went to India in 2020 and promptly got stuck there because of the travel ban that was instituted by Trump at that point of time. So one part of it was my department, the department was extremely supportive and did an excellent job of negotiating with the deans in order to permit my online teaching for a longer period than perhaps might have happened if I were here. So that was one part of it. The other part of it I had to figure out regarding what I would need to do in order to be able to re-enter the country, because even when the travel ban was lifted, the whole visa process was so saturated. I had to get a national interest exception. It was like it was a whole mess, So having that sort of network, which was outside the university for my case, was very helpful for small things. Like, for example, I remember when I finally got a visa appointment in 2021, and my national interest exception thing was being processed. So, on the visa US consulate visa portal, the status automatically apparently changes to refused or rejected. I forget the exact term first. And that doesn't really mean that your visa is refused. It's just, I don't know why they want to like this kind of weird sadism on their part, that they will put refused or rejected first when it's actually processing, and then it'll change to accepted or whatever the real decision is. So thankfully, I already knew this from the Facebook groups that I was part of. So when my thing changed to refused or rejected or whatever it was, I didn't panic. I knew that, okay, this is probably just the normal processing thing happening. And within 2 or 3 days, it did change to accepted, and I did get the national interest exception, and I was able to return in January 2022. But I think if I didn't know that, I would have probably had a heart attack or something. It would be bad. Like, it's you don't want to go through these things without having some sort of insider knowledge, So I don't know if there is a sufficient critical mass of international faculty within the university to facilitate a sort of support network, whatever form it might take, on immigration issues. But if something like that could be instituted, that would be fantastic, I feel. Because I think that's one area where I've had to turn to people outside the university for, immigration related advice and help. And also expanding the faculty and staff immigration services would be also extremely helpful, I feel, for this reason. But otherwise, of course, like I think going beyond beyond one's comfort zone, that is extremely important. In my case, I think that had already happened a lot during my PhD. So I think for us, there's also different ways in which we come to the country and different amounts of time that we've spent here previously. So in my case, language was not a problem. My master's was in English literature, although at Jadavpur, that's really a more broad literature course. It's more like comparative literature, really, because we also did a lot of South Asian and Indian literature. But since it was like an English literature degree, so for me, English was not a problem. And also English was one of the major languages of higher education in India. So it was not an issue as much as it could be from, as compared to faculty from other locations where English perhaps is not as established as a language of higher education. So I think also recognizing this kind of diversity among the international faculty is essential in linguistic terms. In terms of even immigration issues, like some countries have a much shorter wait time for green cards. Like I know friends who were international faculty here who got their green cards within 2 or 3 years. In my case, it took like 7 or 8 years, despite me being on the EB1 process, which is like the more, it's supposed to be the fast track process for people who have sufficient number of like, I think, whatever publications or some criteria which enables you to, upgrade your green card application to the EB1 track. Like when EB1 started, I remember Randall told me it would probably just take 2 years. But then the presidential regime changed and the processing time became longer. And so you never know like how anything is going to go. So having some sort of network is really helpful. One last point I will make, less regarding, I mean, it's also connected to the administration, but not regarding immigration. I think tenure expectations and expectations around your books or research output or articles, whatever it is, these can be very discipline specific and even department specific. So having a kind of clear channel of communication on that is, I think, very essential. So I think for me, I wish I had been a little more proactive in my early years. In my case, my department DEOs were actually very proactive. They were more proactive than I was, and set up meetings with me to check in and where we could go over the tenure expectations. That was very helpful. And one thing that I would say to other international faculty who are in the early stages of their process is, if your department, your DEO or others in the department don't reach out themselves, do not hesitate to ask, do not hesitate to set up meetings and to lay out these expectations clearly. So for instance, in my case, actually, my tenure file was article-based, not book-based. And the flexibility that Gwiz has in this regard was helpful because I had, I think, about 8 or 9 articles and 5 or 6 book chapters. So I felt that that was a lot. And at that point of time, I was about 60% done with my book. But I felt that I wanted to keep a little more time for fieldwork because the situation in India was changing quite a bit legally. And my fieldwork is about partly about the legal recognition of queer and trans identities and how grassroots communities interact with that process. So I felt that instead of rushing to just get a book contract as soon as possible, it would help if I could make my tenure file more article-centric. And I remember in my 4th year, I had a meeting with the DU at that point of time, who was Rachel Williams, and she looked at my CV and what I had already published and what was forthcoming, and she was like, oh, this is totally fine. You already have a lot. So that was really helpful because now I knew that, okay, then this is how I'm going to structure my tenure file, which again, this is very specific to my case and to my department. It might not work for other disciplines or departments where you have a very book-centered approach, where it's like one book plus 2 articles or whatever it is, and then in other departments, it might be entirely article-centric, like some of the more quantitative social science disciplines and so on, right? So I think having a sense of that and of what is expected, what parts of the expectations are negotiable. So in my case, whether it would be article-centric or whether it would be book-centric, that was negotiable. But there were other parts of the tenure process that was not, that obviously that were more kind of set in stone. And, like the teaching part, for example, is very standardized. You have to go through a very standard, so getting those evaluations done in time, at least up to the time you're in tenure, you also have to look out for the evaluations, student evaluations to some extent. And for instance, in my case, I teach one course which always gets below average student evaluations because it's a diversity and inclusion requirement. It deals with contentious topics around gender and race. And again, I think I had very helpful conversations with my department right from the time of my 3rd year review onward regarding how we would strategize around that particular course, because I knew that that course was going to bring up tricky evaluations. Some of them were even frankly racist in my case,
So I'm going to jump in.
Sorry,
Ani.
yeah.
So thank you. Yeah, you've really covered a lot of ground there. We do want to leave some time for Q&A. So you actually just kind of answered the question that I was going to ask as a last question, which is someone earlier mentioned how everybody is nervous about tenure or promotion, depending on if you're a clinical track, instructional track, whatever. And so all of you are very successful. All of you are tenured. Some people on this panel have made it all the way to full professor, and have named chairs and so on, and Uday is a dean. So, there's a lot of success on this particular panel. So I just wanted to wrap up by asking people if they have quick tips for international faculty success. And again, Ani, other people, some people have done field work, Annie and Ani have done field work in other countries. There are things that international faculty, types of research scholarship that you're engaged in that's perhaps a little different from domestic faculty. So yeah, quick tips for success. Can I start with Uday? Maybe one quick tip.
Make lots of connections and network. That's the key to success. No matter how qualified you are or how technically sound or exceptional you are in your field, nothing works without connections.
Thank you. Okay, Sandra?
I would say the same thing with networking, but very important to me for international faculty is to be proud of your background, be proud of what you're bringing as an international faculty, because just by us coming to a different country and speaking a different language and having our career in a different language also, and so many cultural differences, we have a lot of curiosity, a lot of empathy and adaptability. So I think as an international faculty, be proud of it. Many times you feel like as a junior faculty, you need to blend in. I think stand out for who you are, how unique you are, what you can bring to your institution. And I have found that the same way in my clinical caring for my patients and my residents and the interactions that I have had. So that would be my tip. I think you can bring a lot of really good things by being international. So that's what I would probably suggest. Be proud of it.
That's great. Thanks, Sandra. I'm going to go to Annie, and then I see Uday's hand up. So we'll circle back to Uday. Yes, Annie.
I think that I will echo Sandra as well, to be proud of who we are, what to do. We've crossed many oceans, many borders, and we have our place at the University of Iowa, and we're proud of what we've done. So I think it's really a matter of continuously believing in ourselves and branching out and cultivating this culture of branching out with domestic faculty. So not just for ourselves, but creating this sort of new discourse at Iowa that international faculty, it's not just that international faculty are on one side and others are on the other side, but we come with a very interdisciplinary and very wide background that we're bringing to Iowa to make the University of Iowa even more international than it is already. So pride and believe in that what we do is the right thing.
That's great. And Uday, you had something to add?
I will third that. In fact, I'd go one step further and say I would even advise chutzpah actually, rather than pride, because in terms of what Annie said earlier about us being polyglots and English being just one language, I speak 5 languages and have some pride in that. That's richness. We are rich. And in fact, laugh secretly at perhaps the former president of the United States, who only could speak 1 language, and that not very well. So, we are intellectually happening people, and we bring things to the table that this country benefits massively from. And never forget that.
Okay, thanks so much. Now, there are some questions and answers in the Q&A, and Russ, were you gonna maybe
Sure. I will go
moderate?
ahead and moderate those. And just maybe one thing to wrap up, just the comments that have been said, is that we are certainly privileged to have you as faculty on the University of Iowa campus. Your contributions are immeasurable, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for everything you do to make our intellectual and cultural life more robust here in our community. So thank you, and you have every reason to be proud of what you've done and what you will do in the future. So with respect to the questions, some have been submitted in advance, some have been submitted via the Q&A. We've been focused on faculty issues, understandably, but I would like to bring early student issues into the conversation. The first question kind of along these lines is the following. So a participant asks, how can we address intercultural awareness of international students among faculty? And I think that this question is exceedingly important. I mean, obviously, in this office, international programs, we deal with international students all the time. And one of the things that I've noticed is that often international students just go unnoticed in classes. They're overlooked, either in terms of their presence or their needs, unless there's a specific issue that needs to be addressed. And so maybe I'll ask this question of Sandra first, because the College of Dentistry has so many international students. Sandra, what is your experience with this? How can we address intercultural awareness of international students among faculty? Because the College of Dentistry does a very good job of this, I think. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of those best practices that you have observed or implemented over the course of your career?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the things is some of this job has been done over years by a lot of my mentors. So I kind of took the program, and there were a lot of international. So it's a 60-year-old program, and most of the residents have been international. So part of that work has been done at the College of Dentistry. some of the things that I have done to help them to expose them nationally is also support them. If I have get some grants to be able to support them to go to national meetings and expose them to speak in other organizations or academies to be able to know that there is other possibilities out there that they can be representing the University of Iowa. Within the college, I've organized, for example, it's called Lunch Around the World. So I have the residents talk about their culture at a noon hour. So people bring their lunches and then they talk about their countries, and it has nothing to do with dentistry. But for an hour, we get out of it and talk about who we are, what we do, our traditions. Things that we do personally is we definitely right now, for example, with Ramadan, all the faculty had put little lights in our offices, like lanterns in our offices to kind of respect their holiday. We do potlucks very often that are with international food. The College of Dentistry do organize these type of events as well that are international. So and also when I'm in meetings, I make sure that they get introduced, they get exposed to what the countries are coming from and what are they planning to do in the future. So I try to help them to network, not only within the College of Dentistry, but outside in national academies and meetings.
Very good. Thank you for that, Sandra. Ani, what would you say in this regard in terms of how to address intercultural awareness of international students among faculty?
I think just in terms of international students, again, there's a lot of diversity. It's very hard to have a sort of one-size-fits-all approach. And it also really depends on which kind of department they are in or which major they're considering. So I think in case of like both gender studies and Asian languages and literatures, which is my other department, international students are, I mean, they are there, but often they are like, as you said, they are not all that visible. And I feel that they can easily get lost in a classroom. In some other disciplines, like in engineering, etc., there is a high concentration of international students, particularly among graduate students from certain areas. Like there are a lot of Indians, for example, in engineering and computer science, particularly, I believe. So it really it depends. And then there is a large section of international students from East Asia, much less, I feel, from South Asia. People who are from South Asia are often, there are people who are already who were born in the US or are second generation, especially in the undergrad. Like graduate school is a different matter. So I think being aware of that, I feel that it would be helpful for workshops for faculty on some of these issues, to have workshops on some of these issues, and particularly the diversity among international students. So I think for undergraduate students, again, having something like affinity groups might be helpful. I'm sure some of them, these are already there in place. I really like the idea of some of the strategies that Sandra, you just went over, having regular check-ins in the form of perhaps potlucks or cultural events or whatever they might be. That would also be helpful. Having a very clear pipeline or channel of communication to the departmental administration and leadership. I feel already many departments do that quite well, but maintaining that is very helpful. I think especially for international students who are struggling with issues related to language or immigration and various other things, just to have a sense of what resources are there on campus and whom they can reach out to. And if there is more awareness among faculty who can direct them to such resources, I feel that would be great. And some faculty are already very well versed in that, but I don't know if this is it's something which is true across the board. Yeah, so in brief, that's what I would say. And obviously there's more that we could expand on any of these particular things, but I'll leave that for perhaps future discussion.
And Uday, I know that you work with many, many international students. Can you speak to your experience in this realm?
We are engineers, we are socially sort of debilitated. So I don't know if we are doing anything, in fact, in that regard. The only reason why international students are fairly comfortable in the engineering school is because there are so many of them. And I think that's actually to their detriment, because that means they just stick to each other. And I tell my international grad students, I have half and half, international and domestic. My advice to them is just stop sticking to each other, and go watch football, or what is the latest television show on HBO you're watching, and when we go out, like lunch or something, we never go to ethnic places. It's because they need to get themselves out of that. If they're going to stay in this country, the worst thing they can do is to stick to each other. It just doesn't work. They have to learn to live in this country and work in this country, which means it's a very diverse place, and they have to acculturate themselves to being functional in a much wider setting. So just Indian students hanging around with Indian students is just not going to help them. It just doesn't work. So that's what I usually tell them is. One thing I do want to say, Ani said something very interesting about language, and I want to go back to that a little bit. It's not just the language. It's not our accents. It's not just our, vocabulary. Those are not, to me, actually as detrimental as the idiom. I think it's the idiom that we lack. Even when we write, earlier in my career, I used to write, and it was pretty evident that it was an Indian writing, because we're taught to write in a certain way. We're drilled to write with a certain kind of lilt to it. So I actually make my Indian students read Hemingway, because we're not exposed to much to Hemingway in India, but we read a lot of Dickens, and you start writing in long-winded sentences that probably worked in the 19th century or even maybe the 18th, but does not work in modern America. You have to learn to write like Hemingway. And so, it's just I make them read Old Man and the Sea, and they hate me for it because it's such a boring book. It's just some old dude trying to, pummel sharks with clubs. But I tell them, that's actually a metaphor for life. It's, first of all, Hemingway is not just writing about an old man in the sea, but also learn to write like Hemingway. That's much more of the American medium. And it's just not in the written, it's also in the oral idiom. The way we talk, a lot of times, it's not just our vocabulary or our accents, it's also the way we express ourselves that doesn't fit in the idiom. So, how do you learn that? By watching Seinfeld. So, these are the kinds of advice. I'm just telling them all these crazy things that, they dismiss immediately and roll their eyes, but it is important.
Very good. No, thank you for that, Uday. As a literature person, I'm delighted that you mentioned Hemingway and Dickens, even though their styles are completely different. They each have a role to play. Maybe a final question from the Q&A. And that is one that I think everyone has touched upon, and you have exemplified as well. And the particular theme of this question is leadership. So Juliana writes, developing leadership is one of the expectations of a faculty member. Can the panelists share their unique challenges developing leadership skills and the institutional resources they found helpful to support them in that process? Now, I think each of you has held or currently holds a leadership position in your department or on campus. And so tell us about your leadership experience. I'll start with Ani. Because we've worked together, for a long time. I've seen you excel as a leader. How did you, embrace those roles, and what advice would you give to international faculty to kind of follow in your footsteps?
I think that the ecosystem I am part of has really given me a lot of energy, or sort of, you know, develop some skills to do my my job as a director of graduate studies. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is that in our department, we are really privileged to have a cohort of graduate students who come from several parts of the world, mostly from sub-Saharan Africa. And it has been some sort of a tradition in the department. We've always had students coming from different international, students with international backgrounds. And I believe that seeing those classes, you know, which I'm really thrilled to teach, with international students interacting with domestic students on critical paradigms, working together, not only in the classroom, but outside, I think has given me some elements to work with in terms of branching out and developing some of the intricacies that you need to master when you are a director of graduate studies, namely empathy, openness, relational dynamics all the time, making colleagues, you know, understand the complexity of some approaches and some backgrounds and integrate them into the department and grow up as a department with those new those elements. So I think that I would say that the students give me the material and I process it. So I think that that's why I think that I'm really happy to deal with on a daily basis, because it allows me to sort of create some holistic methods in the ways in which I work and the ways in which I advise students along their pathways from the coursework that they will be taking, their reading list, how they're going to apply for a job, how they're going to apply for grants. So I think that it's this human ecosystem that really fuels me, you know, on a regular basis. And to sort of go back to the previous question, I think that the other element that is really interesting for me as well is to bring this international ecosystem into the undergraduate program. Because when I was supervising an advanced course called Oral Expression in French, I created an activity called Bridging the Iowa City Community with the French class, where students, advanced students taking this advanced class, could use their skills to go within the community and translate, interpret. That could be any types of NGOs or the UI hospitals or elementary schools. So giving students the possibility, undergraduate students, the possibility to interact with an international community in Iowa City. And at the same time, giving graduate students the opportunity, graduate students teaching those courses, the opportunity to be in, to sort of craft the environment that is necessary to allow undergraduate students to interact with the community. So another element that helps me as DGS and in other ways, as I was on the faculty senate or faculty assembly or the faculty council. So I think that I benefit a lot from the community I'm part of, and that helps me throughout my my job. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for that, Anit, because I think what you've underscored is that leadership and innovation go together. And in your case, involving the students in the community has set an excellent example for them, and has also shown your own creativity as not just a scholar, but a leader. So I want to leave the final remarks to Gigi. I'll just do a program note really quickly, and that again, this webinar will be recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel within the next 7 to 10 days, and it will serve as a resource for faculty and students moving forward. So, Gigi, to you, the honors of the final word.
Well, we're really at the end of our time, so I just want to thank everyone for their participation, to the panelists for all of the insights they shared, for being, for your candor about your own experiences, for being amazing role models for international faculty on campus, and yeah, just for everything you've contributed to this discussion, which was really rich and wide-ranging and so helpful, I think. And I'm seeing hands clapping from the participants, so I think other people also appreciated everything that you shared. And I also want to thank everyone who attended. The time flew by too quickly. I think there are a lot of topics we didn't really get into, like the promotion and tenure process, like classroom teaching, but as Russ says, we can address those in future webinars. So thanks to everyone, and to Russ for helping me organize this, for all your support.
Well, thank you, Gigi. Thank you, everyone. And we will do this again sometime soon. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.